So, hello everyone, and welcome to the UN Commission on the Status of Women program called Advancing Safety for Women in Librarianship. This is a co-production of two organizations, Urban Librarians Unite, which is an organization driving advocacy and providing wonderful resources to promote 21st century community in urban libraries everywhere, and PAVE Prevention, Proactive Anti-Violence Education, which is a consultancy helping libraries improve resiliency across the board, and of course, creating safer communities globally. I'm Heather Turnbull, and I'm really privileged to be able to moderate today's session. A couple of reminders again. We are recording today's session, so we appreciate you muting your microphones. And as questions come to you, as I know they do from time to time when we're promoting and being involved in these great discussions, drop them in the chat. We'll be monitoring those, and there will be opportunity later in the program for an open Q&A session and great chance to interact directly with our two esteemed panelists today. Our agenda today will, first of all, address this topic of safety in a context that is broad, and then we'll work towards a narrowing of that into particular strategic as well as practical outcomes. We'll have a look at some of the umbrella issues that are common to safety in public places everywhere, because after all, libraries, especially our urban ones, are that kind of public awareness and forum haven for free speech right across the world. And we'll also look at zooming in on the current reality of what's going on in your local library. We'll hear, first of all, from two panelists, Lauren Comito, who's the Executive Director of Urban Librarians Unite. And as mentioned, they compile a tremendous amount of data and direct contact and the voice of urban librarians everywhere. And so you'll be privileged to a lot of the dialogue internally that's going across our libraries, what's top of mind, and an immediacy of the incidents that they're facing and their desires for creating safer workplaces right across the board for their community partners, their patrons, and for staff members. And then secondly, from Arlene Lemus, who will talk very specifically from the perspective of prevention. What if we were to prevent some of these incidents from happening in the first place, or at least mitigate some of the impact, to measure it appropriately and then institute some systemic changes that will bring about and preserve safety for both our patrons as well as our library workers. Then we're going to have an opportunity to engage in moderated dialogue, talking about how do we bring this down from the wider end of the funnel, as it were, into what are some practical changes that can be implemented. We know, regardless of our constituencies, that libraries are governed by municipalities, sometimes by federal funding, state funding, provincial. There are a myriad of ways in which resources are controlled and access to those resources are controlled by governing bodies and by sort of strategic partnerships. So we'll look at that, and then also to try and winnow down how do we at a local level start to influence and advocate on making some of these changes for the better, so that we're not only just preserving safety, we're looking after the well-being of everyone who frequents libraries. So policies, advocacy, implementing systems change, gathering around the table here today, some great thinking and resources towards making that possible. And then eventually distilling into some, unique steps that each of us can take. Because in bringing together anyone for this kind of a dialogue, we're always advocating about what will be different and what can I do? What can I walk away with? Something positive that I might be able to implement in my local library. And I'm sure your local librarians will appreciate that. So context-wise, why are we talking about this? And how do we know What is sort of the thinking behind it? And certainly, if you're currently working in a library, you might say, "What's taken you so long to talk about this topic?" Conversely, if your perception of a library is a quiet space with hushed tones and lovely books to borrow and other media, you're likely out of step with the reality of today's libraries and facilities. They resemble more of a community hub, offering an array of social services. And in fact, sometimes libraries offer social service workers and have them on staff in their facilities. Some of the other services, in addition to the traditional library offerings, are food banks, even on a part-time or full-time basis. They could be a warming center or a cooling center, settlement services. There's a whole array of services now that coincidentally are almost like our municipal services. And because the traditional interpretation or reputation of a library is of that safe space in the community, barrier free, offering a safe haven for people, it has become more of a mecca, if you will, for those individuals who may be experiencing precarious or affordable housing, for example, healthcare needs, you name it. And we all know we're experiencing all of that in our communities. The safety issue emerges, of course, when community members may exhibit complex behaviors for which library workers are ill-prepared to address. We all want to be empathetic and we're all in service to community, but clearly there are some things that are outside the realm of our capability and our scope of our skill set. So whether we're resigned to call 911 or another community responder to assist, what do we do to preserve, in the meantime, our own safety and the safety of other patrons who may be involved? So library workers are dealing with a lot. And evidence of that, of course, is how it gets captured in incident reports, and by extension, how those are dealt with by leadership in the organization, sometimes as teaching tools, sometimes as risk management when it comes to an escalation where health is concerned, sick time, other escalation, mental health, et cetera, et cetera. And the extreme cases where media may be involved, where it reaches public awareness in the extreme. And that brings us to the impact of the tension, that desire to support all of the community, while at the same time, where do we get those skills and how do we have a physical environment that supports that? So that brings us to our conversation today. And I'll invite, first of all, Lauren, to speak first about some of the data that they have collected within their organization and to present sort of a current reality from the perspective of library workers, what's really going on and how do we know that? Over to you, Lauren. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. So one of the things that we know in American public libraries specifically, but all libraries here, is that we are a primarily female profession. And that has a lot of impacts. Most of us understand the impact it has on our pay, but also on how we're treated and thought of by the public and the people who are seeking our services, right? We have this sort of responsibility for care that is sometimes placed on us to an extreme that is outside the scope of our professional, responsibilities, and yet is still expected. And also we're seen as people who have to serve and take abuse in a way that, you don't expect, civil engineers to take, right? We have similar levels of education for our very different uh, professions, but you don't see people going into a civil engineer's office and screaming at them generally, although I'm sure sometimes that does happen. So having this sort of imbalance of gender in the industry leaves us in a place where people treat us like we are less than. And for the men in our industry, because this is seen as a female profession, and you can be a male librarian or you can be a librarian, they're also treated with the same sort of misogyny because they're not, by virtue of being a librarian, they're not properly performing masculinity, which also leaves them vulnerable to violence in a way, in sort of a similar way to us. Um, if we want to go to the next slide. So in 2022, we released a study that we began in 2020, um, which contained, at Urban Librarians Unite, which contained a survey of 6 focus groups and a forum of public library workers of all different levels, security, clerical, librarians, directors, everybody who is within a library environment. And we found that 68.5% of library workers had experienced violent or aggressive behavior in their libraries. 22% reported that that came from their own colleagues, which we kind of knew before we started the study, but it was sort of difficult to find that survey result and go, oh no, we were right. Being right stinks. I don't like it. I still don't. This is not a great thing. And it it leaves us in a position of feeling defensive all the time. Many of us are diagnosed with PTSD, and because we have this sort of society-wide structure of a social safety net filled with holes, the library ends up filling a lot of that space for local governments in a way they're not funded or trained to do, which leads us to having to take on some of the trauma of our communities in a way that, again, we're not funded or trained to do. One of the things that came out of our forum was this sort of, you can't self-care your way out of a broken system. And so part of the results of the study were that we were really looking at ways to support each other, because while I would love to fix society somewhat, it's not something the libraries can do by themselves. It's not something library workers can do by themselves. But what we can do is acknowledge and support each other as we go. Um, we want to go to the next slide. Cool. And so one of the things that came out of the study that was recommended by multiple working groups in our design forum was a peer-based support network so that we can support each other more broadly. So we have a virtual library worker support network currently led by its second cohort of peer leaders. We have approximately people coming from approximately 30 different states and Canada. It's all a virtual, program. It's not, as Leah's saying in the chat, not just for urban public library workers. It is for everyone. And we do have a rural support group set up just for those needs because we know that while urban and rural libraries actually have a lot in common, there are some fundamental differences that maybe rural librarians want to talk to each other in their own room. And so we've made that available as well. And so we had a couple other questions on the first slide. One of them was, what are the consequences for leadership and retention, right? And one of those consequences is that people are leaving. I have several colleagues and friends who've left the profession in the last few years, including recently. And that leaving or that not applying for jobs in public libraries is creating a structural staffing issue, which makes us unable to meet the needs of the community and less safe overall, right? Because if you have fewer staff in the building, there are fewer eyes on the building, fewer people to help de-escalate, and it creates a situation that, while I won't say is unsafe, is certainly less safe. There are some other solutions. So the next slide is this is actually one of the support network participants comments after they were done, which is one of the things that helps us keep the work going. honestly, is the survey results and the things that people send us afterwards where they feel like they're not by themselves anymore, because that is sort of structurally what Urban Librarians Unite and what library workers can do together is create these spaces where we acknowledge the reality of things that are happening and create support for each other and ourselves. The other thing we can do is the next slide, which is work on legislation. So there is a Library Workplace Violence Prevention Act currently in the New York State Legislature, brought up by DC 66, asked me, and we helped with it as well. And Assemblymember Bronson's the chair of the Labor Committee. He brought it forward. It has just passed the Assembly and still needs to pass the state Senate to be made law. But it would require all public libraries in New York State to implement formal workplace violence prevention programs, which right now is not something that every library worker in New York State has because of the legal structures of how libraries are set up. Currently, only municipal and government agency libraries fall under the public worker, the public employee workplace violence prevention law. Um, and anyone who works in a 501c3 library that contracts with the municipality or area does not fall under that. So this would require that libraries go through and do an assessment of the risks in their workplace, train staff with workplace violence prevention, and tell them like what actions they're able to and allowed to take in the event of a threat or a violent action. Because for a lot of workers, they don't know what they're allowed to do to respond. And then to implement some prevention measures like panic buttons, reporting systems, support structures, so that we can keep it from happening going forward.
Thank you, Lauren. Can you dig a little deeper into perhaps some of the data that you've accumulated, explicit or anecdotal, around, the particular impacts to women in library work? Because there were, a number of short points that you made that could be extrapolated to that. First of all, experiencing aggressive or violent behavior with their own colleagues. Um, we know
Yeah.
trauma, and the accumulation of it can have that ripple effect. And so, have you seen anything, or has there been some data presented in any of your surveys around that specifically? And second piece of that would be, what have you seen as an antidote or an addressing of that? Because, from a layperson's, a community person's point of view, we're often aware of this through the media, and it seems to be community bringing the issues into the library space versus it already existing.
Yeah, I think one of the things, one of the things that comes up a lot when we start talking about this is this assumption that uh, people experiencing homelessness are the ones doing this stuff, that people experiencing mental health crises are the people that are enacting violence and aggression in libraries. And that's not entirely the case. A lot of the aggression comes from other women. I think that most of the public libraries here would know, when you're being yelled at because somebody has an expectation of you, it's not always someone who you would stereotypically think, or you would see the comment section on an article about violence in the library saying, you should keep those people out. It's a lot of times um, middle class women yelling at us. I've had people, get in my face and really get in my face and be verbally abusive. So I want to make sure that's clear, is that we are doing it to ourselves in some cases. Um, the assumption that the failing social safety net is the only reason that this is happening is probably false.
Mhm.
We have a sort of society-wide social breakdown of norms happening that is problematic.
Mhm.
And I think women are just more vulnerable to that breaking down of norms,
Mhm.
because we're expected to take it historically, to be quiet, to do what we're told. We end up, as people start to be more aggressive about things that
Mhm.
really it's not necessary, we're the ones that it falls on. And in many ways, the violence towards women in libraries, besides the additional aspect of sort of the widespread sexual harassment, which I actually didn't mention because it just is so common that it's like,
Mhm.
well, it's Tuesday, somebody must be doing something. Um, it's I lost my track there, but it's just baked in, I
Mhm.
think, to the profession because we are so overwhelmingly female and thought of as care.
Mhm.
Um, One of the things we do is we host self-defense classes every third Saturday at a boxing gym,
Mhm.
where library workers can come for a really inexpensive cost, and like learn how to stand so they don't fall down. And once
Mhm.
you've learned how to stand so you don't fall down, people start to treat you differently.
Mhm.
I've noticed that, like, as soon as I started taking fencing, there was
Mhm.
once I got good at the footwork, there was a dramatic shift in how people talked to me,
Yeah.
and how people treated me. It
Mhm.
fixed my posture. It fixed like just sort of how I carried myself. I didn't feel like I was going to fall down. So when somebody's getting in my face, I'm not as likely to do the things that would cause them to escalate.
Mhm.
And I can de-escalate better. And that's one of the things we go over in the boxing classes because it's not about hitting people. It's about not getting hit and
Indeed.
getting away from it. And I think that that is helpful for women in general, but particularly in libraries where the real idea is just not get hit.
Indeed, metaphorically taking a stance, aligning that with your voice, finding the words, and especially when under the pressure of the moment, when you are activated and adrenalized, that's a whole other competency, set of competencies that are familiar to some of us in today's session who have that as a background, but not so much to those who haven't had access to that, nor is it provided seemingly in any of the programs that are geared towards curriculum development for Masters of Library Science, et cetera, et cetera. And that ties back into your earlier comment, Lauren, about the huge risk around replacing the current cohort of primarily women in these positions. Because as we do know, and perhaps your data will attest, that it is an aging population of workers. And if they are leaving early, that has implications, especially around the knowledge that they have accumulated and the expertise leaves with them prematurely. And there's no passing of that competency and that wisdom to the next generation, nor is there a proper onboarding if you're able to recruit people effectively and provide that promise of a safe space. That's stimulating, and all the other things that are naturally attractive to people for this work. Is there anything, again, in your data that indicates, not so specifically around the need for training and supports, but prior to that, what would distinguish one library recruitment strategy over another, especially as it pertains to safety? Where are you finding that next generation, and what kind of tools can library leaders look to that can attract that next generation?
Yeah. So unfortunately, that's not data that I have. But I am also an adjunct professor who teaches library management. And within the course, we spend an entire week on trauma-informed leadership and what that means and what we can do to make sure that staff, we're never going to be fully safe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And acknowledging that's really important, that like it's a level of safety that we have within a library building and determining what we're comfortable with that is important for each individual person, but also important as a team. So because we're never going to be fully safe, because we so value sort of the radically open nature of libraries, we then have to make decisions about where we put things in our building, what team member does what in the event of, an incident, or, how many people you have out on the main floor. In a public area, as far as I'm concerned, there should always be at least two. If there's one person in a public area, it's just unsafe. And that then in some rural libraries, there is no choice but to have one person because there's only one staff member, period.
Mhm.
So in that case, you have to make sort of a different safety calculation. But each person and each institution kind of has to do that for itself right now because there are no industry-wide standards for workplace safety in libraries. It's not a thing that exists. There's a lot of like things you learn at the branch when your manager teaches them to you, if you happen to get it.
Mhm. So there again, that's that passing on of information anecdotally or not formally. And if that
Yeah, like
communication is not clear or documented in terms of policy, it is unevenly communicated.
I remember the time I learned, oh, if there's a shooting outside, you lock the door.
Hmm.
And I didn't learn it because anybody told me before there was a shooting happening outside. I learned it because while there was a shooting outside, the manager went and locked the door, which would not have occurred to me because no one ever said it before the event happened. Now, if that were to happen, I know exactly what I would do because that is what that manager did, and they were right, you know, but it's not something I was taught formally. A lot of what we learn in libraries is on the job regardless, but that particular thing, I remember exactly what everything looked like that day.
Mm. Interesting. Well, as usual, some things are lagging. The reality sometimes precedes the systems and the policies in place to mitigate some of these issues. So appreciate you sharing that, and also the perspective of earlier in the supply chain of folks for the profession, what we need to be doing to provide people with the resources to be successful and safe in their work in libraries. Um, Having had that context, I know, Arlene, you've been dying to get in on the conversation since we started to talk about footwork and establishing a safe presence. What's your perspective, first of all, from PAVE? What informs your thinking from a prevention point of view? Because let's face it, organizations, at least in the Western culture, aren't predisposed to prevention. We're all about going in and repairing and rescuing things. And we're seeing quite a bit of that in this particular area of safety on the job. Where does PAVE sit in all of this? Why does it assume that prevention works or is helpful? And where do you see institutions playing a part in a response to creating safer spaces?
Um, well, that's a lot there. But what I will say to that, Heather, is that um, the curriculum that we impart at PAVE Prevention is deeply based in a movement called Empowerment Self-Defense, which really was a response to dealing with gender-based violence. It was a different approach to self-defense that stepped away a bit from traditional martial arts type of self-defense. And so we have that as our foundation, which really it aims to empower the individual with a set of skills to keep themselves safe and to help them heal from unsafe situations they may have already experienced. So we are deeply based in that, and we have taken that to into the curriculum that we bring into workplaces, specifically in libraries in this case. And this is who PAVE Prevention is. We
Mhm.
are a social enterprise which aims at training and consulting workplaces and their leadership and their staff to prevent, address in real time, and to heal from violence. Next slide. Um, Within libraries themselves, this is the type of work we've been doing. We've trained over 35,000 training hours. And we have well over 40 years in the field experience with our trainers and our curriculum development team. We've worked with several public agencies now in multi-year collaborations. We are very deeply connected to assessments, our own proprietary assessments that we've created, and the DISC assessment. And we're able to roll out training for organizations in around 4 to 6 weeks and get that moving. And our stats have been very rewarding and complementary post-training data that we've been able to collect. Next slide. These are just a few of the stats we've collected post one of our organizations, Alameda County Library. And so this is the type of movement we're getting. I feel confident practicing grounding techniques in stressful situations, moving from 38% to 91. I feel confident in practicing physical self-defense skills, 37 to 85. And I'm going to hold here and just touch base on the things that Lauren already shared with you and that she has brought into her team, which is this idea of, taking a boxing class, which is, I mean, there are so many benefits to that, right? You get this kind of footwork, you get this physical activity, and you're getting stronger and healthier. And you are releasing a lot of stresses that you have may already dealt with in the week before or whatever. So stance, although it seems like such a simple thing, when we are under stress and activated, we twist our arms, we cross our legs, we try to make ourselves small. So although it seems like such a small thing or something that could be, why are we talking about it? Your stance is so important. It's your foundation, it's your connection to the earth. So stance is super important. Then followed by footwork, how you move in that stance and keep yourself safe. But these are just some of the stats the positive impact we are having on our organizations. Next slide. So who else besides PAVE is saying, and who else beside Urban Librarians Unite are saying that, this something needs to be done. We need to start addressing not only in libraries, but specifically we're talking about libraries today, but all workplaces. The U.S. Surgeon General, the EEOC, OSHA, and OSHA now describes violence in the workplace from bullying all the way to full-blown physical and violent events. So those things that we had not acknowledged, we had not wanted to acknowledge how those things like gaslighting and bullying and omitting people from certain things, those are now falling into that spectrum of violence now. You have the International Library Organization, who has an incredible amount of stats on what's happening in workplaces. And then here in the United States, Healthy People 2030 is an initiative from the Center of Disease Control that talks about we have a problem now in 2020 is when the 2030 initiatives went out. We have this problem and we'd like to put an impact. We'd like to reduce this problem by 2030. And for the first time, violence in the workplace has been included in the Healthy People 2030 initiative. Now, my gut tells me that the folks on this that are joining us today already know these stats, but we wanted to share some international stats with you as well. We know very well from the great research that Urban Librarians Unite has done, but these are some stats about what's happening internationally, and they're pretty. I mean, they're just heavy on my heart. When there are war-torn areas or areas that are experiencing a bombardment of any type, it seems to always find its way to libraries. And in the most recent survey, the recent stats we have there, is more than 570 libraries have been destroyed in the Ukraine. Because this is a place, and this is, I wouldn't have felt this or known this like I know it now 5 years ago, had not worked in libraries. But now, over the several past years being in libraries, libraries really are holding on to so much of what's important to a democracy and to a society. And so it makes perfect sense that if people are trying to damage that or make it less settled, this would be the place they go. So, next slide. And so I'm going to take a few more minutes before I pass it back, Heather, because
Mhm.
there are some things I want to share about what we've learned in libraries. And library is in a unique setting for violence. What I mean by that is you'll have what I'll call real world violence, right? And that's anything that's brought into the library, someone in a mental health crisis, as Lauren had already touched base on, someone who's coming in to perpetrate a violent act, violence between coworkers. So you have that element there. Then you have the violence or trauma that people have from outside of work, that when they come, they can't just turn that off. So if they're living in a community that's riddled with gun violence, they bring them by bringing themselves, they bring that trauma and that violence into the library space. And then you have the people that are enjoying the library, your clients, your members that bring their trauma as well and their how their life has been impacted by violence. So it's all of this swirling around. And then you have this incredibly empathetic group of people working there that are dealing with vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. So it's just this really, really unique setting that needs skill sets to heal, needs skill sets to ward off, needs skill sets to communicate. All of those things are vital to succeeding through those days and taking care of yourself. Thank you, Heather.
Can I actually add something to that
Please,
really
please
quick?
do, Lauren. Yeah.
Because I think one of the things that we talk about like preventing violence and we talk about self-defense classes, and we miss sometimes the impact of joy in a
Mhm.
library on the safety of everyone. So it's not just, like you have a joyful children's room where people are happy and kids are laughing. That isn't just like the mission of the library. That's actually violence prevention. Like
Yep.
having some people come in and where you say hi and you remember their name because that you value that. That's violence prevention. Like in my library, our book drop is a big fuzzy monster because it makes people smile as soon as they walk in. And so they're automatically less stressed. We have a community fridge. It's somebody's not hangry. It's all the joy of like a public library is prevention. And so I just want to make sure we don't lose the joy because that's what makes it worth going to work.
Yep.
I appreciate that, Lauren. And that's part of the image that's coming to mind is the sort of the teeter-totter of, as you mentioned at the outset, joy and trauma. And we're perpetually moved to the trauma portion of it because it gets attention. It's
Yeah.
measurable, it's notable, it feeds into the narrative of a violent outburst, which captures attention, it captures headlines.
Yeah. And everything is
And
terrible and we have to fix it. And like,
indeed,
yes,
yeah.
but what if we fixed it with balloons
Mhm.
sometimes?
Yeah. One of the things also I'll share, Lauren, that is in line with what you're sharing with us is that we do an exercise during the training on what you're doing well in the 6 categories of being a trauma-informed organization. And usually it's such a like an aha. We are doing that. We are doing this. We are doing that. We are nailing it here. We are doing a great job here. And just that recognition of this is all the good you're doing in your community already. Yes, we're going to get better. We're going to add a couple more tools in your toolbox, but you are already doing all of these awesome things already.
Yes, as Leah just said, we deserve pats on the back. And how does, the question for you, Arlene, how does um, the pre-work that you do at PAVE, consultation right across the board with leadership, with frontline workers, with union heads, and so on and so forth, how do you get a gauge of that?
Mm.
And how do you leverage that? Because we know from a learner's positive point of view that what gets acknowledged and praise gets repeated. How do we leverage that into improved behaviors? Because we do know that we still seem to be retaining a number of workers in this work. Women are choosing to stay in it. They are frustrated, they may be afraid, but they're showing up every day because they have this huge commitment towards public good amidst this sea of incivility.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I will share, and I'm sure there are organizations that would test differently with us or assess differently with us. But the organizations that we've worked with already, Heather, when they take their employee experience survey, which is our proprietary assessment tool that we use, they are saying that they're still committed to their job. They're not looking to go anywhere. For all practical purposes, they're loving what they do, but it's just wearing on them. And so we'll collect data like in the last 30 days, how many days have you felt physically strong? And we're getting numbers like 5 to 9 days out of 30. How many days have you felt mentally strong? And we're getting out of 30 days, 6 to 10 days. So in spite of that, they're still committed to their community. They're still committed to the work that they do in the library. So we are still seeing that. In addition to that assessment that highly impacts the customization of our curriculum, we use the DISC assessment. We have an interview process with leadership. So we try to bring in all stakeholders to prepare for what the training is going to look like. We review incident reports. All of that is impacts how the training goes.
So it sounds like it's very reality based and
Yeah.
very inclusive in terms of the key stakeholders.
Yes.
Appreciate that. And something that Lauren, that you mentioned very early on was the physical space in which library workers work. And with the exception of a few new constructed libraries, it seems to me that a lot of them are just out of time and out of design with today's contemporary needs. You have beautifully architecturally designed spaces, but are, from a safety perspective, just not safe. Something may happen in a corner on the fourth floor, and whereas the security presence may be at the front, which I think traditionally had been to prevent someone from stealing materials, now it's a presence of some sort at the front. But you know, how do we impact from a systems point of view and take some of this data to influence the design of new spaces? Because otherwise, the very best of what we offer in terms of safety training may not work because of the physical plant that dictates our work.
So I'm laughing because I have a weird opinion on this. I actually think
Love to hear it, Lauren.
that the perfect branch library can be found in the 1908 John Cotton Dana Library primer. That the Carnegie building, built around a central desk with sides for different needs, is visually safe because you can see everything that's happening. Thanks, Christian. I see you in the chat. Um, because you're sitting in the middle, you can see the adult side, you can see the kid side, you can see the front door. And what we really need is just more 1908 Carnegie buildings, but with like 5 times the number of electrical outlets.
Mhm.
Whereas when I work in a newer building, for some reason there's nooks that don't have to exist. I worked in one building where the stairs went over my head at the front desk, so people come right in. There's people walking over top of you. The sound was echoing. If someone screamed, I couldn't tell where it was coming from. So some of the newer
Wow.
construction is actually less safe than the original, like old school library that we're trying to get away from, um, which I think is really unfortunate. And I think John Dana had it right. Like Carnegie had it right. This perfect little branch libraries, um, where you can see everything, and even when in the multi-floor options in the book, you can still have good sight lines
Hmm.
for everyone.
Yeah.
I think we
Sometimes
could get back to that.
everything old is new again. Yeah.
Yeah, like we
And
have
for
this
the
idea
record,
that we have
there,
to like make spaces that are separate for children so it's quieter, but like that's actually slightly less safe. It
mhm,
requires more staff too, which we also don't have.
mhm. Yeah, that leads to a
Sorry. Yeah.
good topic. No, appreciate that. That leads to a good
I could
topic
info dump
of
on that for like
budgets.
2 hours, and I won't. But I could.
A whole that'll be the next session, Lauren. Well, for the benefit of those who may not know, there is at least one consulting firm, design firm, composed entirely of women. That may be helpful. At least there's an empathy towards it, who are looking at the use of space in a contemporary way of the programs and so on and so forth that libraries are offering, with a focus on safety, a welcoming space, and empathetic space, while not losing sight of it being utilitarian in a contemporary way. So we are, again, looking at some positives here. A couple of things before we finish off with Arlene's focus on the prevention side. As we look at not just the extreme side of incidents that constitute getting recorded and being studied, for example, what's the impact of the kind of the microaggressions that may lead to some of the conflict with colleagues and the overall contribution to work effort, being present on the job, and wanting to continue, from a retention point of view? Because quite often those just don't get amplified to the point of attention and remedy.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're seeing through our trainings and through our collaborations within the library sector is one, we're able to bring in the DISC assessment, which really is an incredible tool for teams. And so there are real conversations around how people like to communicate and how they like to be communicated with. And that just starting that conversation on, for example, my DISC assessment, you're not going to get a lot of uh, deep numbers. You're not going to get a lot of detail. I'm going to come with a big picture. But if people on my staff really need me at times to focus on those little details, I need to buckle down and know that certain teammates of mine need to hear things a certain way, or else they're not going to be as interested in participating in whatever project we're working on. And when they come to me, they know I don't need to hear every minute detail in the project. And so that's a big deal for library staff to start having conversations around. And it really increases where people can bring in their most value, where they can contribute the most. And we have just watching that as that third party, this new interaction between teammates has been fantastic. So that's been a big plus in that conversation. And then the other thing I'm going to say, Heather, is that we really we focus a lot on what is happening with us and
Mhm.
what is happening to me as an individual. Am I activated? Is this landing on me in a way because of past trauma? Am I reacting a certain way because of my own bias? We have these conversations. And once you start having those conversations with yourself, it also gives you some insight on the people you're dealing with. Are they activated? Could they be in an escalated or activated state because of something that I have no idea? It's not just the printer, it could be something else. And so these conversations really go a long way with us. And this is what we've heard from the folks that we've been working with.
Mhm. And with that is that building of trust, which, especially if you're experiencing the training with others that you don't normally work with, who may be from other branches or other geographical areas. If it's a collaborative event, then you have a common shorthand already with your knowledge of the work that you do, but there's an extra level of trust, which I think fosters well this opportunity of knowing, understanding, and building some responses to what is universally being very destructive potentially for the profession. So trust leads to responsibility, and ultimately the bigger question as we move from data, which provides that awareness, that documentation, which everybody insists on having. How do we move that from statistics to action? And first of all, the question is, who really are the stakeholders in the responsibility area? Lauren, in your experience, who holds that responsibility?
Well, I think we all do. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think everybody has a responsibility for safety at work in general. And I think not just within the staff, but also the public, like our neighbors. A lot of times it's been other patrons who've stepped up for me when something was really about to pop off and like de-escalated and taken that person like out for a coffee so they'd calm down. Like, so if we look at it as like everybody's responsible, but everybody's responsible in different ways, right? So like can be bystanders, staff each can have their role, and administrators can set up policies and responses to incidents that make people feel seen and valued.
Mm-hmm.
So
And I
it's
imagine
everybody.
it's a good litmus test of the faith and the loyalty of your patrons to you, to have that courage to step up, step in on your behalf, because we know bystander intervention is erratic and
Yeah.
sometimes has that perception of being, I don't want to get involved.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's actually almost always one of my homeless guys who pops up and is like, no, leave Miss Lauren alone. Like, we're gonna go
oh,
do something else.
hmm
Like, it's usually them. But they have a vested interest in keeping the space safe
hmm
because
yep.
they want to be able to stay there. And so they have like ownership. They in order to be able to stay, they have to, work together to stay safe as well.
hmm
Heather, if I can chime in on your
hmm
responsibility question, I mean, I agree with Lauren. This is something that everybody has to own their part in, right? And we have worked with organizations that have dedicated safety teams, and I would argue that they're making the organization a little less safe because it's this constant like, well, we'll just call the safety team. We'll just ask for the safety team. We'll just bring in and it really, so many things escalate because of that could have been de-escalated. And it's this lack of a skill set for each individual to protect themselves and keep themselves safe. And so that personal responsibility, and then I'm responsible for myself, but I'm also responsible for taking care of the two people next to me, in a sense, I'll use as an example. And then, of course, yes, upstander or bystander intervention conversations and a skill set to be a good upstander or bystander, all of those things contribute to the safety, uh, I believe, in a much more impactful way than having security guards or dedicated safety teams. I think those are a yes and. They can be there, they can also contribute to safety, but each individual in the organization needs to have the skill set as well.
hmm Indeed. And that whole sense of bringing in a totally different culture potentially into your organization, represented as a security presence, where in fact they may not be aligned with your mission and vision. And may totally represent to a variety of patrons who come from different backgrounds, more of an activation rather than a sense of safety. And so what is it that you're communicating? It's tough. It's, as you said, Arlene, it's a yes and response. And one wonders if we were to safely distribute the responsibility with proper training across the board and build resiliency across the entire organization, what impact would that have on potentially reducing that kind of a presence and the associated budget of having that security uniformed presence in a library? And this is totally dependent on everybody's individual situation, but it does bear that question. So yes, there's responsibility widely over a variety of stakeholders, and it's heartening to hear that some communities are willing to step up in advocacy and protection of library workers. That speaks a lot to trust that's earned. The bigger question is this hostility towards women in public environments. And can we take that on in addition to everything else that we were supposed to do? Again, topic for probably a whole other session. But given that the trend is that for women to be involved in this work, how do we build resilience? How do we build, that additional strength so that women feel welcomed in the space, supported, and have ownership over their own safety, in addition to what organizations may be able to provide? Mm. Lauren, what's your gut on this?
I think giving staff the ability to walk away from, so we have this customer mindset, right? That puts us in a position where you still have that whole the customer is always right, even though the second half of that quote in matters of taste is in matters of taste and not actually the customer is always right all the time, even if they're screaming at you. So I think it's really important for like policymakers and administrations to give permission to walk away.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, especially newer library workers will stay in a situation that they don't have to stay because they haven't been told that they can say no. They have been brought up in library training as a we're a service, to help people. This is what we do, and not told that they can say no or that they can hang up the phone. Like there's this guy who calls library, has women read Wikipedia articles out loud, and does the thing I guess this guy does when he's doing that, and people stay on the phone because they don't realize that they're allowed to hang up, that they can take that agency and do it because they haven't been told. Like, wait, no, that's not customer service. That's gross. Hang up the phone, And I like, so as a manager, when I'm doing that, I make a point of saying like, by the way, you can hang up.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's yelling at you, you can hang up. And making that policy and giving people clear guidelines is really important. Like, because otherwise we're just prioritizing service over the well-being of staff. And, leaning into this, we are mothering our community, and this you never get to stop being a mother of your community, do you? So letting people know that they don't have to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very important. And again, greater utility from the learnings of incident reports. And what can we learn from that? What can be instituted as policy that improves on the situation? And to your point, gives agency to those that said, yes, you can hang up and you can have some autonomy over your response. Yeah.
But one interesting thing about that guy is that the only reason we all know about him is Reddit, because we don't, and I know you're going to ask when structural change next, we don't have nationwide incident report statistics at all. So like, there's no formal way for everybody to go, for someone to go, hey, this guy wants me to read a court case. What's going on? It's all Reddit and informal whisper networks, which is, good and like
Yeah.
historically a source of, female safety, but also we could be better
Mhm.
about that.
Yeah, communication remains, especially that's one that is contained to the internal community for the betterment, just the national registries and so on and so forth. How can we use the collective knowledge and appreciation of these incidents to better good locally? And by extension to training, which improves skill and responsiveness and so on and so forth. Starting to get some really interesting questions and comments in the chat. I encourage you to add your questions in because in a few moments we're going to move to the more formal question and answer period, and you'll have an opportunity to ask either Lauren or Arlene or both something that is important to you in terms of this conversation around safety and particularly women in library work. Just to finish up our conversation here around specific action, how do we move from what we're hearing as some great ideas, which haven't been able to be amplified yet? How do we amplify a lot of these great ideas into a collective action? So I might phrase this as if you were to design something that would get the word out and also influence policy and resources, i.e., budget, what might be ideal to move this from collective advocacy to action? Yes, gossip is important, Leah, that's for sure. How can we move
Well, I
this
mean,
from?
I think one of the recommendations from the trauma study originally was a set of workplace safety standards. And I still think that that is one of the things that we
Mhm.
need to build. Um, it is an issue of finding funding and people willing to do it. Because if you set up a set of workplace safety standards, then people might feel like they had to abide by it. Um, so right now, the legislation that I talked about earlier is sort of that locally. And if we can, whether it passes or not, take some of that information and expand it out to like, what does safety look like? Like,
Mhm.
what are the basic requirements for safety in a public space in a
Yeah,
trauma-informed way?
Heather, something like the Joint Commission for Healthcare Facilities or Medical Facilities, where they have to check off several of these boxes and to be in good standing with the Joint Commission.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that would be awesome if something like that were made available, even if it starts just with a 10-point checklist that all libraries would have to abide by. That would be awesome. I mean, one of the things, Heather, that I think would go a long way is libraries need to tell their story better. They
Mhm.
don't
Yeah.
share. I mean, when I talk to people about, man, this was my interaction in a library that we worked with, and these are the awesome things that they're doing. I mean, this place in Connecticut just graduated 287 new citizens. They're doing that in the library. I mean, they're doing so many amazing things in libraries. And I don't think the average American knows, or I would imagine in other countries as well, but definitely in our country, they do not know the amazing things that are happening in libraries. So if they could tell their story, more people knew their story of the amazing things they were doing, it would also shine light on the things they need to do even more of that great work.
Well, it's all about building advocacy and a coalition of support. So, what's to say that a local organization for profit who previously had donated to the library in terms of goods and services and so on, so why can't they also be involved in supporting training so that it is a community effort, so that it lifts the community, it brings focus to that need, but also the ancillary benefits of trust, relationship building, awareness, resiliency, et cetera, et cetera. Because as we see that a number of these very diverse activities are going on in community, they happen to be resident in the library, which is a destination hub for this. And what better investment could an organization make in their community? But it's linking that to awareness, building their comprehension above the kind of bricks and mortar. Yeah. Additional ideas, Lauren?
I mean, I think to start with, we probably have to start talking about it, which is something that that Ula's been working on in sort of a cultural change way for the
Mhm.
past several years, because one of the things that happens is people don't want to talk about the incidents that happen because we don't want to make people feel scared, right? We don't want them to not come to story time. So rather than openly address it, we don't in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. We sort of hold it in internally in our organizations. Um, and I understand that impulse. I just think there has to be a middle ground between
Yeah.
scaring people away from the library and acknowledging that society sucks somewhat and that also exists in a public library as much as it does outside, right? And
Mhm.
that you're not less safe for walking into a library than you were outside. You're just
Yeah.
indoors. Um,
Indeed.
Yeah.
but because we don't talk about it and because we have this keep it quiet sort of mentality, a lot of times people just aren't aware
Mhm.
of what could be done to help.
Heather,
Indeed.
I would say, Heather, I would add to Lauren's statement there. What we find sometimes is there's even a gatekeeping around incidents within the organization itself.
Mm.
So something happens in one location or one branch, and the other branches don't get information on it, they don't hear about it, or it's gate kept a little bit. The incident's in a book in a back office where you'd have to go look for it. So we really try to encourage the organizations we work with to share those, run through scenarios because of those. If something happened at this location, make sure that during the morning huddle or however each branch opens or closes or whatever their routine is, let's talk about what happened at that branch. Could it happen here? No, we don't have a second floor here. So it diffuses the situation as much as it brings awareness to it. It can also be used as a scenario to run through and to diffuse the anxiety and the feelings that may be coming up around those incidents. So not only are they not being shared with the public, but a lot of
Mm.
times they're not even being shared within the organization.
Mm. Yeah, and that is often a consequence of trauma and closing down and closing off and isolating it to be able to deal with it in a way that is informed specifically by policy, by risk management, by legal HR. We know the cascading of effects of that. Meanwhile, people begin to make up their own reality around, is it safe to go to my public library? Because people are trying to safe inject in the washrooms, for example, or there are a lot of people who are precariously housed that may go there during the day because the urban environment in which these things are operating doesn't leave them with a place to go during the day. They can stay at the hostels overnight and then they are resigned to going to the libraries during the day. So they're complex needs that, again, are as a result of a cascading issue of social welfare problems in a number of urban settings. Um, so moving, again to specifics and what we can take locally as actions. Where are there ways locally that we can, implement better solutions and perhaps speak to someone at a political level that may have an influence on the strategy, governance, going a little bit upstream perhaps of leadership in the organizations, because what we've seen right across in North America and probably elsewhere, uh, those of you who may have attended the Metropolitan Library Conference last fall here and hosted by Toronto Public Libraries, got to hear from your colleagues in metropolitan areas across the world reflect very similarly to what we've discussed today, the angst associated with providing safe spaces for public discourse, for democratic free speech, without the associated resources to do so. The training, the security, et cetera, et cetera. So we're all in this common desire together, while at the same time trying to figure out what resources can be put in place locally. So knowing that there is a universal and an international group who feel similarly, what could be instituted perhaps in the way of like an ISO standardization for the library profession, which would help to unify a lot of these issues and ultimately bring some resources to bear to alleviate some of the challenges associated with safety. Is that a possibility? Can the library profession think about doing that?
We've been thinking about it. The funding is not necessarily there, um, but it is. I've got a big long list, and it's right on there.
Yeah.
What we do, just as a nonprofit, the funding pays for the time to do the work, and that's sort of where we are.
Mm-hmm.
Like we are, federal funding isn't really accessible to us anymore, so that's out. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's that or a lot of volunteers on our
Mm-hmm.
end, but also the gatekeeping and like the systemic, you know,
Mm.
yeah, that $14 million for those freedom trucks really could have paid for a lot of that. But that's neither here nor there, or anywhere really. Yeah, it really comes down to like the gatekeeping of both resources and access to the data that we need to be able to, push for more of those. And like, I could write a policy tomorrow and make it great with some of my colleagues, but if people aren't willing to use it because we haven't finished the culture change, then it's not going to really work out yet. So it's just going to be a long process.
Mm-hmm.
Heather, I mean, I can't speak with the authority that Lauren can speak or other folks on this presentation can speak, I'm sure. So I'm at a deficit there within this sector. But I can tell you that we recently brought several of the organizations we work with in a region. So, and it included three library organizations, a human services department for the city, the park kind of compliance officers, and then a community responder program. All of those organizations in that community had gone through our training. And the conversations that they were having to better serve their community and the acknowledgement that there may be citizens walking throughout their community that got touched by several of those people at the table, their
Mm-hmm.
organizations, it just the ideas that started going back and forth. The community responder program may end up being the response that comes to libraries now in that community instead of
Good.
calling 911. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not only do libraries need to talk to one another, but they also, every once in a while need to talk to the human services department and need to talk if there's a community responder program in their area or to the folks that are closing up the parks. Lessons learned are very similar, I'm telling you, within all of those organizations. So de-siloing within the library sector itself, but also within the community that they're serving, having those conversations as well, I think have a lot of value.
Mm-hmm. It's a great aha because when we think about it, how are they getting funding? They're obviously accounting for costs associated with the deployment of responders, time it takes, and especially for a big ticket item on any municipal budget, which is police services. Um, yes, you can have a look and say, are we able to contribute to a reduction of that if not everything gets escalated to a 911 typical response where multiple services are deployed, where in fact a community responder attendant with an EMS may be sufficient and the associated costs with that. So So yes, and wouldn't it be fantastic if there was an ISO certification for library workers, which would validate the great work that is done and also bring attention to the fact that it is a legitimate and very worthy profession that needs to be supported with professional development and the respect that it deserves. So that's a great aha to take away. I think we have a couple of questions, and I certainly want to open it up now more formally to questions from our participants. Lots has been discussed here today. We want to hear from you. What has popped up for you? What's been an aha? What have you been dying to ask either Lauren or Arlene, or just to put it out there to the Mind Trust that's here today, because we have a great representation from our stakeholders across the board in this profession. What's a question that you're wishing to ask of our panelists today, or very generally to our group?
Heather, I think someone had asked about the architecture firm that you had mentioned. So,
Yes, and I've been, it was a group that was an exhibitor at, I think, at PLA last year. And I will look in my business cards for the name of that group, but I happened to strike up a conversation with them because of everything that we've talked about. We're looking to move the design of library spaces into more contemporary appropriateness for the services that are now provided. And yeah, from childcare to settlement services to everything in between. How do we build those safe spaces so that we can all operate respectfully, civilly, and effectively? What's a question that you're often, oh, here we are. Elizabeth works in a membership-based library. Member retention is a high priority since we don't receive public funding. Sometimes our members can be very particular about the customer service they expect, as they feel their membership fees pay our salaries. Has anyone worked in that sort of customer service library environment? One that is driven by member revenue?
I haven't, but Leah answered. They tell us
Yeah.
that too in public
Yeah.
libraries.
Mhm.
I one of the so I went to Europe. I went to London with my kid a couple of years ago, and one of the things I noticed was that in every single public space that I went to, at Buckingham Palace, at the airport, wherever we were, there was a sign up that said, you know, verbal abuse of our staff is not permitted.
Mhm.
You pay, places where you would pay for tickets for would have a sign up as you walked in. Verbal and physical abuse of our staff is not permitted.
Mm.
And so if even there in these um, other paid places, we can still say this isn't permitted. And also, God, it's sad that we need signs. I think
Mm.
that it doesn't matter where you are, treating people with respect is a requirement
Mhm.
regardless.
hmm.
So you would think that a membership-based library in a chosen community would want to treat the staff that they are paying for with respect so that you can do your job well
Mhm.
instead of being abusive because they pay for it.
Yeah.
Um, I will also add to that, Elizabeth, we did do some work with the Mechanics Library in Oakland, and then Alameda County opened up a few spaces in their training for the law library. And I was again quite surprised at the type of scenarios they were dealing with. But again, people come in there, they're doing the research and trying to gain information because something traumatic or pending or activating, and they need this information right now. So it does create the right setting for people to bring all that in and for the library staff in that organization to have to deal with. So it's there, it's ripe, and the skills are needed.
Mhm. And has there been greater incidence of this post-pandemic? I mentioned that because instability has always been with us. It's just a question of whether it was expressed more emphatically. and coincidentally, the lack of consequences associated with it. So I famously call it this combination of entitlement and deprivation. When people are deprived of something, they feel they're entitled to it, then the explosion of that comes face to face with people who are public facing.
And Heather, I'll just add one more thing to that is that we have heard of organizations that also use a restorative approach for staff, I would say, when people are suspended or members are suspended because of, a certain type of behavior. In order to get reinstated, there is that sit down and an acknowledgement that, one of our staff members was wronged or a conversation around how it landed on them. So I think that could also, help things moving forward and maybe, have folks take another look at, hey, if I do this, there's going to be repercussions and there's going to be a conversation that needs to happen.
Mhm.
So I've been in libraries for almost 20 years now, which I'm old now. It's fine. Um, and it's been this slow build until COVID, and then so we put in the proposal for the funding to write the trauma study in 2019, and we finished the second portion of the proposal on March 13th, 2020, right before everything shut down. So
Mhm.
like we knew that it was a problem before that, and I think COVID. I, I honestly think that the neurological impacts of the COVID virus have made people meaner, and
Mhm.
the trauma of it has also made people meaner and more less able to regulate their emotions in general. So it did pop up after, but it was happening before.
Mhm. Yeah, well observed, Lauren. Marco Galeran, you had your hand up a minute ago.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks. I had a question related to what Lauren was saying earlier about kind of the layout of the Carnegie building, the safe space. And I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on creating a safe physical space layout versus what patrons may expect out of using library space? Because I know a lot of patrons depend on those little nooks and crannies to get privacy, so to speak. So,
Yeah,
Thanks, Mark.
unfortunately, privacy sometimes tends to be a problem. Um, One of the things I really want to do in my library right now is get a bunch of silent disco headphones and DJ some lo-fi beats in the afternoon while after school is out, so people can hang out in the adult section without hearing the yelling kids. Um, Study rooms are great. I just think, glass walls are good, and there really should. I really think that you should be able to see almost everything from a public service point because we can talk about adding roving reference all the time, but people really do expect a reference desk. They expect a point of service where they can find you. And so someone has to be there. And from that space, if you can see everything, it is safer.
thank you. Yeah, I like the idea of like, yeah, like a glass wall, so to speak, where you still have visibility, but also there's a sense of privacy as far as sound level. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, transparency is important. While our participants are submitting their final question or questions, I'll just ask Lauren and Arlene to pull together their final thoughts and takeaways. What in particular is the main message that you wish to convey to our audience today, in particular reference to the key question, maintaining safe spaces for our library workers, in particular women library workers, as we face through a number of elements that are challenging, while still managing to maintain our empathy and our support of all community members. What's a final question that you wish to either put in the chat or just to share before we wrap up? And I'll say on behalf of Arlene and likely Lauren, if there are some questions that you think about following the presentation today and wish to follow up and connect with either Lauren or Arlene, contact information is here. Just click the QR code. And this is a conversation. This is not a discussion that ends today, but we hope we have opened up some thinking, some possible solutions, some ideas that will carry forward into actionable ideas in your own particular community. Beth had asked, what are ways that we can get involved in this work? I think joining Lauren's organization for sure. Volunteer work, and there you go.
Yeah,
urbanlibrariansunite.org. Get
we
involved.
have a whole website, we have a whole page just for that.
Fantastic.
And we're not a membership organization. We couldn't see any reason to make people pay for yet one more professional association. All you have to do is show up.
Perfect. And those of you who do have access to libraries, either in a rural setting or suburban or urban, reach out to the people who are on the governance side. These may be politicians in your community, community workers like yourself. They often have opportunities to join their boards. Why not get involved? That's the most effective way of doing so. Or if you have connections with a donor to your public library, reach out to them and share with them, were you aware that there are safety issues in our library system? And there's a part that you can play, either contributing to support that through resources or joining in the team and participating in training that builds community and builds resilience. So some final thoughts from Lauren. Take a minute to share your takeaways, key takeaways, and what's one action that our participants here today can take with them.
So I I have thought and still think that this is a culture shift that we're making, that the going from the small, like staying small, don't bring it up, don't tell anybody so they still come to the library and give us the funding we need. Um, Changing that is going to take time, but it's all of our jobs to do. Just, so the next time you see the one thing that you could do that will make a really big difference for somebody is the next time an event like an incident happens in your branch, reach out to the person it happens to and ask how they're doing. Because one of the things we found in our study is that people do not do that. And then a month later, reach out again because everyone will tell you they're fine the day after, but a month later is when it hits. And asking if they're okay and then forgetting.
Mm-hmm.
The month mark is the PTSD point, and you want to double check it.
Excellent advice. Yeah. Arlene?
First, I just want to say thank you to Urban Librarians Unite, one for creating the study that they did, because it really gives organizations that we work with the justification for our training and the tools that we bring into their organization. So we're incredibly grateful for that. Urban Librarians Unite have been great partners for us. We'll be right next to each other in a couple weeks in Minnesota at the ALA conference, so you guys can stop by and say hello. Our booths are right next to one another. If I can leave you anything, it's very similar to what Lauren has shared with you, and the add-on to that is that we need you. Our communities need you, our country needs you, our cities need you, our society needs you. And so we feel very fortunate to be able to support you as a sector, as an organization, because you are so needed with everything going on today. So take care of yourself, take care of your teammates and your coworkers to better continuing serving the communities that you serve. And we are so grateful to have you. So thank you. Thank you for being here today.
Appreciate that, Arlene. Thank you, Lauren and Arlene, for the wisdom coming from your practical as well as your aspirational wishes for the profession and by extension safety in our communities. And thank each and every one of you for investing in the time today. If you can take away one particular aspect of this that's an aha, I encourage you to share that with a colleague as soon as you get off the session today. That's when it's fresh in your mind. And in that way, we can amplify the benefits to our community and create safer spaces for everyone involved in our libraries. On behalf of PAVE Prevention and Urban Libraries Unite, thank you very much for your participation.